He is my co-host at Fox and Friends Weekend. He's joining us every other Wednesday right here on the Will Cain Show. And starting this morning on Fox and Friends, every Wednesday, if you wake up, you'll catch Will and Pete Off the Grid. It's a weekday version of our weekend segment, Off the Wall. And I'm going to bet, first of all, you have OCD, you're calendar oriented. I think you spend more time prepping your to-do list and calendars than you do executing.
Right now. Yeah, I see it.
Whatever appears on that calendar. Yeah, and you're conscientious. You're definitely a loving husband. You nail Valentine's Day.
Maybe. First of all, you've never described me as wise. You need to go back and watch the podcast and get the wisdom of Tony Robbins. You've never described me as such. Second of all, Mark Wayne Mullins might punch you in the face by the end of the interview. Interesting guy. You should definitely watch that. He tried to fight somebody in a Senate chamber. That's going to be interesting. Valentine's Day. Here's the thing for me. You're right. I'm very organized. I think through it. I get stressed if I'm not ready for it. But my wife, you got Christmas, then it's her birthday on January 30th, and then it's Valentine's Day. And so I'm exhausted by the time. I benefit from one thing, Will. My first marriage to my high school sweetheart, we divorced. Our wedding was on Valentine's Day. So I get to downplay that day because it's not an anniversary that translates into my marriage with Jen. So it's sort of a muted holiday. I have to recognize that flowers are en route to the house. We will. I don't get into late tonight, but we will celebrate it on Tuesday of next week. Here's what I figured out, Will. Don't try to get a gift. Gifts are stressful. You know that. So what I've done is I've combined birthday, January 30th, and Valentine's Day with a shopping with Jen all day where I just carry the bags and it's my credit card and she kind of does whatever for the day and I follow along. And that way I don't have to do anything, but she loves it.
I love that. But here's the thing. I can't execute because my wife gives me an out, which I happily accept. She's always like, let's not do gifts or, I don't like shopping. I don't want to spend money. And then I'm like, cool. And I don't know if it's meant. I don't know if it's sincere, but that little parachute ripcord allows me to exit the free fall. I'm okay. Cool. Next holiday. By the way, who did Senator Mark Wayne Mullin try to fight in the Senate?
Oh, he called him out in a hearing. It was a union boss. It was some union boss that was there, and apparently they'd been going at it over Twitter. And so this union boss shows up in his committee and he calls him out. And then he's like, you want to fight? And the union boss was like, yeah, I'll fight you. And then he's like, oh, I'll fight you. And then he stood up behind the dais and the union boss stood up and then a fight. They almost fought. They both look like pretty tough dudes. I think the UFC fighter is going to be okay. You should ask him. Double check it. I'm pretty sure it was Mark Wayne Mullin.
That story now rings a bell with the union boss. By the way, you and I play cowboy. I mean, I think Mark Wayne Mullin's the real deal. Like he's from, Eastern Oklahoma, and I know a thing or two about Eastern Oklahoma. He fought, and he's got horses. I think if I were ranking senators that I least want to tangle with, but might most want to have a beer, he might come in number one.
High on the list. I mean, he's got two first names combined into one name, Mark Wayne, and that is a sign that you are legit country. All right. And he's a U.S. senator. I mean, that's it. I wouldn't fight the guy. Yeah, now I'm in trouble with him. You got me in trouble with him. I don't want to fight you. You win.
Oh, I want to tell you a quick story. First, a point. Mark Wayne Mullin. He's fortunate that the space was left out between the two first names, because if it had been a two-name, moniker, would be high on the list for Secret Service targeting for potential presidential assassination. You know how that works. Yes. That almost all presidential assassins have been middle name. Two names. Lee Harvey. Who else is escaping my attention? John Wilkes.
Oh, John Wilkes Booth. Yeah.
So by losing the space, he's taken himself off of a Secret Service target list. Hey, I was in Las Vegas for the Super Bowl. And how did this come up? I was walking down the Las Vegas Strip with my son, 16 years old, and we were talking about The Rock, and there was somebody that I had met at the Super Bowl who was really like jacked and in shape, and he was like, "Do you think you could win a fight with him?" I was like, "No, I couldn't win a fight with him. You know, he would destroy me." I wish I could remember who this was. And it was Gronk. I think it was Gronk, because I was telling him about some guys that I had met at the Super Bowl, and then he goes, "Do you think Pete would win a fight with him?" Let's just presume for a moment it was Gronk. And I was like, "Wait a minute. Did you just escalate your rankings? Did you say, well, you can't fight Gronk, but Pete could win a fight with Gronk?" And he goes, "Well, yeah." And I go, "So let me just see if I can do the math. Are you saying that Pete wins a fight with me?" And he goes, "Yes." I said, "Well, A, you're right, and B, I don't like you looking at my friend and going, he's more alpha than my dad."
That is a hilarious Will Kane admission. I want to thank Charlie for that endorsement. I think it's super cool, by the way, that you brought your 16-year-old to the Super Bowl. Like, what a moment. And I saw that you had the hat when you went with your dad. Like, I got chills just saying that and thinking about that. That's super cool. What an experience. I'm still at a place where I've convinced my kids that I could beat anyone in a fight. Anyone. The Rock, Gronk, anybody. I'm still invincible, and it's still in the bloodstream amongst all of them. I know that facade is going to break down. I think, but you're right. I'm kind of into building those facades, knowing that they're going to fall down later. And your parenting style is a lot more of like, hey, I'm just going to be real with my kids. Like, of course, Gronk would beat the crap out of me, and you know, likewise with the Rock or whatever example I would use. I just prolong the disappointment. But Charlie, I appreciate that, Charlie. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you've managed to cultivate an image in a young 16-year-old man's mind, but it is an image that would fall second to Mark Wayne Mullen. Coming up in just a moment here on The Will Kane Show. All right, story number one with Pete Hegseth. First, I want to start with something that on the surface is, I think, really ridiculous and light, but I have a deeper theory that I want to run by you, Pete. So first of all, Rachel Dolezal, famous transracial NAACP activist. Everyone can remember that Rachel Dolezal for years pretended and pulled off that she was black and rose in the Pacific Northwest high up in the rankings of the NAACP. She, I don't know if she darkened her complexion. She definitely had like dreadlocks. And, you know, of course, afterwards she was accused of cultural appropriation. I mean, at some point, by the way, transracial is going to be accepted. It's as logical as transgender. But the new career path for Rachel Dolezal, Pete, is apparently she is on OnlyFans. She is, and I'm not pretending to be more pure than I actually am. I don't know much about OnlyFans, but it is a subscription-based, basically porn site. And Dolezal is on there. Basically, I think she's doing porn on OnlyFans. And I find this fascinating in that this is her second career move from civil rights activist to porn star.
Well, so I read this article. This is one of those articles you see it if you followed the first story and you absolutely click on it because you need to know what this is about. And I'm with you, Will. I'm not faking virtue here. I know what OnlyFans is because it's almost ubiquitous cultural wise. When you read the article that I read about this, first of all, she's definitely doing like porn by request. That's what OnlyFans pay. And she clearly has a lot of fans in that. And I think OnlyFans becomes the place where sort of B-level 15-minute of fame people get for their extension. And she's making some. But here's the thing. She is also living under a new name, which is, I can't remember the name, but it's like an African name. And she's now an after-school supervisor. So she works for a public school in a different state under a new name and has assumed an OnlyFans page. And to me, I don't know, how does a school reconcile that? If you're doing like, you know, drag queen story hour and gender transitions, why is it not okay for a teacher to have an OnlyFans page and be the after school supervisor? I mean, where's the boundary?
It's a great question. Here's my takeaway, that so many people are seeking attention. It's not a great leap from, you know, fake African-American NAACP civil rights activists to OnlyFans. It's something psychological that people are seeking and I don't think I want to use Rachel Dolezal as this great illustration of society at large, but I think there's two things that are symptomatic. One, all she really wanted was attention. That's it. And she's going to find that attention, validation wherever it's available. At first, it was in the civil rights movement. Second, it's in OnlyFans. But this is the other symptomatic thing I find fascinating. I am shocked, Pete, and I'm not going to lead you down too bumpy of a road here, but I am shocked at the number of women who decide that external validation through the way they look is the end game. What I'm getting at is, and there's an internet term for this, thirst trap. That's an Instagram term. Like, post the bikini picture, post how hot you are, post something sexy. And what I'm taken aback by, Pete, is not necessarily Rachel Dolezal in this moment, but so many people in news, in professional environments, who maybe I'm scrolling and I'm like, oh, hey, wasn't expecting the shot of you in your bikini. I'm a little taken aback by, it seems like if you keep not everyone, but if you keep distilling it down, you boil things down, I'm just a little surprised at how many women end up here. Like after you boil everything down, you reduce it, you end up with, hey, check out how hot I am on Instagram.
Seeking validation and affirmation somewhere else. I hate to be old school about it, but when you pull God out and you pull out families and relationships and good fathers, then you're seeking affection somewhere else, validation somewhere else. And it's become the image of self. It's become, I basically worship myself. And if other people are worshiping me, then that God gets bigger. And as a result, the more clicks, the more likes, the more follows. Here's the thing. I used to say, it's true. I mean, we're all 4 bad decisions away from being the homeless guy. Without God, we're all 3 bad decisions away from being on OnlyFans. Really big, bad life decisions, right? I mean, we like to say, oh, but if you I lose this, I lose this, I lose this, and I give up on God, pretty soon I'm selling myself on the internet. So, I mean, I don't want to stand in judgment of all of those women. But you talk to a lot of women and men, and they ultimately, when they're able to escape it, they talk about how empty it is, and that it is a temporary place to maybe make money or whatever. And obviously there's demand for it, right? If people are paying for it, that's a sad commentary too.
I don't buy that we're 3 bad decisions away from homelessness, but I do buy that we might be 3 bad decisions away from OnlyFans. So with that, what is the male version of this? What is the male version of, hey, check out how hot I am in my bikini on Instagram? What do we do when you start distilling it down, reducing it down to we're the 3 bad decisions away from being what as a man? We're not.
I don't know.
It's not a direct corollary. Dudes aren't about to post shirtless photos, gratuitously on Instagram, and workout videos are kind of for other dudes. Check out me, my workout. So it's not really look how hot I am and needing external validation, but there's something. I just don't know what ours is. You reduce it down, and we're 3 bad decisions from what?
3 bad decisions away from hammering Coors Light at 11 a.m. playing bingo. I don't know. There's a restaurant right near me that has that. It's just you're where you've lost your self-worth and everything around you. That's why I think trying to find worth from the world is increasingly an empty proposition.
I hear you. 3 bad decisions away from self-flagellation. Popping a Coors Light, smoking a Marlboro Red, and seeing if you can hit on bingo.
See where the day goes. Yeah.
All right, story number 2. Alejandro Mayorkas with Pete Hegseth here. Alejandro Mayorkas has been the first sitting cabinet member to be impeached since 1870. He has not fulfilled his duty, according to the House of Representatives. In some way, Pete, it's symbolically important. In other ways, it's practically ineffectual. Nothing will happen in the Senate. Nothing will change. But do you see that differently in any way on this moment for Alejandro Mayorkas?
No, it's what Republicans are best at, right? Pro forma stuff. So like we get to demonstrate that we're really serious about this issue, but getting anything done about it, usually when they're in power, often doesn't happen. Now they can't do anything because of the Senate and because of the White House. So doing this, I think, is the right thing to do. But it doesn't change anything about the border. I'm just glad they didn't cave on the border for Ukraine deal. Now we've learned that Republicans love Ukraine more than they love the border in the U.S. Senate. But I'm just glad they didn't cave on that, because that's a signing on to a bad deal, as Trump has said, is I think worse than signing on to a bad deal is worse than no deal with the clock ticking. He deserves to be impeached. His actions are treasonous. Our border is wide open, and that means you don't have a country. And the Senate's going to just dismiss it. They'll find a way to do nothing with it. But you consider what Trump got impeached for. This is real stuff, in my opinion.
You know, there was a New York Times focus group that just came out, and it was fascinating, I think, in a couple of different revelations. One, it did boil down. First of all, I think 11 of 13 members of the focus group were Trump over Biden. And it isn't to say they didn't have negative things about both. Like, there were negative things they had to say about Trump's personality. There were more negative things to be said about the mental fitness of Joe Biden. But then when you got into some of the issues, and I am a big believer, and I've talked about it here, like, I think issues should be important. I'm not sure they will be as important as the personality contest. And as part of that personality contest, I include Biden's mental fitness. But when it came to issues, the issues that were rattled off by this focus group, again, New York Times, were inflation and immigration, issues that trend obviously towards Republicans.
Well, we're doing this segment off the grid, which is not about the grid and living off. It's about like getting off of the DC, New York media cycle of what everyone's talking about. And when you get outside in America, when I talk to folks, those are the things that come up. Like, I can't afford my life for a number of reasons. I work hard. I've got a middle class existence, and I can't afford it, which means I looked at a diminished life for myself and a diminished life for my kids. And I can't believe we're letting in 10 million people and we have no idea who they are. This scares the heck out of me. And so I do think this New York Times example swings us back to, when things get this bad, it does get back to policy. It does get back to like, hey, I'm going to sign on for the daddy party here. I'm signing on for somebody I may not like in Trump, who's at least going to do something about these things that affect my life. Over the guy who's had a chance and has crushed our country. So oddly, even though the personality aspects are going to get bigger, I think it's so bad that the issues take over some level.
One last point on Mayorkas. Last week, Pete, I had here on the Will Cain Show Matt Taibbi, who's done some reporting along with Semaphore on the lengths to which the Democratic Party is going to go to ensure a victory for Joe Biden. And of course, we know about the lengths they'll go to when it comes to Donald Trump. But this was reporting on what they will do to anyone else who could disrupt the electoral process, meaning the threats they have issued in the form of a letter to, for example, no labels, any third party. I think the direct quote was, "There will be no Jill Stein in 2024." And one of those that they're talking about is RFK. Like, there will be no RFK disruption of this process. And to put a button on Mayorkas, you know, this was recently revealed. It's pretty shocking. He personally declined the Secret Service protection for RFK Jr. And when you put that into the context of what Taibbi was talking about and how vindictive, they said in this reporting, by the way, Pete, forget a skeleton in your closet. If you have a fingernail in your closet, we are going to launch the investigations. And you combine that with, hey, and we're also not going to afford you any Secret Service protection. Like, the links to which over the next, what is it going to be, 6 to 7 months, that we're going to see disruption of the democratic process in the name of saving democracy to ensure that Joe Biden, yeah. I guess, I'm still unconvinced it's going to be Joe Biden, but to ensure a Democrat is president of the United States, mind-blowing.
Democracy will be saved by destroying democracy. That's exactly, I mean, it's Animal Farm stuff. It's 1984 stuff. This is they're parroting themselves, which is why when people say, what should Trump do? the first thing I say, and I mean this seriously, is she needs to double its security. And I don't say that trying to be hyperbolic or conspiratorial, but there will be no end to which the Democrats believe it is necessary that they win this election, to include, they've already said with third parties, you can't do this. And they'll use the intelligence services, as we've learned a lot this week, the CIA or foreign services, to get whatever they can.
Yeah, just to put some flesh on that. So everybody knows that's the new reporting. So when it comes to the Russia collusion investigation, the story now goes, according to new reporting, the CIA asked foreign intelligence companies to spy on Trump. I believe it was 26 different foreign intelligence agencies to spy on Trump. The FBI then used that, those foreign intelligence agencies that accepted the invitation from the CIA, the FBI then used that as a predicate to say that Trump was coordinating with foreign intelligence agencies, creating, I mean, that is entrapment. That is, first of all, it's a violation. Also, it's also a violation of, like, CIA not supposed to spy even through proxies on American citizens, much less election interference. But it's also definitionally entrapment and the creation of something then dismissed as conspiracy.
And we just call it Tuesday. I mean, and at this point, it just rolls off our back. Do you know what I mean? Like, what else have they done that we're not aware of?
And half the population won't believe what I just said. Half the population will not ever, A, hear it, or B, believe it, even when it's laid out with the facts.
Well, because it's their friends that are doing it. So, I mean, they go to the same schools, they've traveled in the same circles, they're intermarried, the media, the journalists, the CIA, the executive. I mean, it's all one giant group all out to save democracy in pursuit of making sure there's only one Democrat that gets to be in charge.
Story number 3. The speed wobbles on Fox and Friends with Pete Hegseth. Before I get into this morning, before you did Off the Grid, you told me, and my return didn't work on Off the Grid. I couldn't see you, so I don't know what you were wearing. But you texted me, hey, man, I'm going to wear a flannel. I'm going to go more casual. I may do a double collar. And I literally said to my wife, hey, this is what Pete said he's wearing. What's a double collar? And she goes, I don't know. What's a double collar? And my return on the Will Cain Show is over here. So every once in a while, you'll see me glance to the right because I can see my guest instead of looking directly at the camera. And I see you're wearing the double collar. I didn't even know this is a thing. I don't know. Do people do this? Is this Minnesota? Is this a Princeton thing? What is the double collar?
I'll say I became familiar with the double collar from Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon made the double collar a popular thing. I think it's great. It's basically a modified a zipper up sweater, right? Like you wear a collared shirt under a quarter zip. This is just doubling up the collars. I think it's a sharp look. I wore it this morning on Fox News. I looked at myself. I'm like, man, I look great. So I decided I'll wear it on the
For a moment, I was like, is he wearing an ascot? What is under his shirt? And like, oh no, it's another button down.
This is the shirt you have also. We got this on Fox and Friends, and I was worried you might wear the same shirt, so I covered it up with a different shirt.
The double button down. Interesting.
Yep.
Pete, I'm going to let you tell this story because I didn't even know this was happening on Fox and Friends. I truly did not. I did not know this was happening until you pointed it out. Now, I'll set it up to this extent. People often ask me, hey, how much do you read on Fox and Friends? Meaning, not for preparation, but on the show. How much are you reading a teleprompter? How much are you talking? And the answer to that for me is usually like, I'm probably reading 20% of the time. Now, I think everybody watching should understand that doesn't mean somebody's writing my thoughts out for me and my job is just to read them. Some shows are more teleprompter driven, some less. For example, The Five, no teleprompter. Any of your primetime shows, almost all teleprompter. But that doesn't mean that they're reading what is told to them. The hosts write those scripts in the teleprompter, and then it's a more polished presentation in primetime. In Fox and Friends, it's really more like The Five. It's less teleprompter. We read to transition. Like, so sometimes we read the headlines. That's written in the teleprompter. Sometimes we read it to set up the next topic. But sometimes we don't have something in the teleprompter, and we have to set up the topic on our own. And I want you to tell everybody now what happens in those moments.
Well, it's next level enjoyable to host with two people you know so well that you can get into these idiosyncrasies and have fun with it, because something like this might actually aggravate hosts if you don't have this like great relationship, but it adds another. So at the top of the hour, oftentimes, we have multiple topics, and it doesn't, this, nowhere does it say, okay, Pete's going to set this topic up or Will's going to set this topic up. It's very much an open season. So if Will's really passionate about it, he might set it up. Or if it's a military topic, I might set it up or whatever. Well, there are times when everyone kind of hesitates and it's like, well, no one really knows who's going to take this story and set it up, because no one really knows the story, because you're prepped.
And really quickly, by set it up, what he means, what we're talking about, is give the facts and the background of the story as opposed to simply opinionate on how you see the story. So the audience needs to understand the story before we give you our view of the story. So the person that sets it up has a burden, has a responsibility to lay up, to set the stage.
So yesterday, you might be like this. So yesterday, this story caught our eye. A school out in California has a new policy that says in the boys' bathroom, every boys' bathroom is going to have, feminine napkins, something like whatever it is. But you've got to give the facts so that Will and Rachel can then sound off on what we think about it. And I started to notice every once in a while when I was doing it, and you can tell, the viewer probably can't tell, but I can tell that I'm barely getting the facts together, barely know the story. I can see out of the corner of my eye, Will is doing this, just staring at me. And he doesn't always stare at me when I talk, okay? But he's staring at me. And it just creates this extra set of pressure, because he feels like I'm losing control. Like I don't really know the topic. And so he's watching me for his own amusement, to see whether or not I can land this plane and finish this setup. And it creates all this additional stress. And so every time Will turns his head now, I feel like, what am I doing? Am I messing something? It gets in your head a little bit. And so it doesn't bother me. I have fun with it. So what happened is I think I shared it with you, Will, that this was happening. Like, this happens. And I don't think you even knew you were doing it. You were doing it. And then so then he knew it was happening. And so now turnabout is fair play.
Well, and you're doing it to me. Now, but here's the deal. I didn't know I was doing this to you. So again, for the audience, like, I can tell when he has full command of a story to set it up. And I can tell when we have all been very patient to see who's going to set this story up, because none of us feel really confident in all the ins and outs of a story. And I can tell when you've taken the wheel and you don't have full command, and you are you're searching with your words on what to say.
This is your analogy, right?
And for me, all of a sudden, I feel the steering wheel, even though your hands are on the wheel. I can feel the wheel go, whoa, whoa, and I look at you because I want to see the car crash. It's like my son, I remember when he was little and I made him skateboard down this huge hill. And the risk on going down this huge hill is if you ever get the speed wobbles. You know what I'm talking about? Anyone who's ever rode a bike or skateboarded down a hill, once you get the speed wobbles, it starts going like this and it gets worse, and now it's headed for disaster. So when I feel you speed wobbling, I turn because I want to see how this is going to go or how you're going to pull it off. And I didn't know I was doing it until you said it.
Be like, you know what? I know you think I'm wobbling, but I'm going to nail this. And sometimes I've noticed you do it anyway, just even if I'm not wobbling, maybe to try to get me off my game. So now I've taken to every once in a while, I will just turn and stare at Will in the middle of his read, whether he's nailing it or not. And I can tell when he can see it out of the periphery, just to return the favor, just a tiny bit. So when you're watching the show, look for some of the. Now, a lot of times they're covering this on the screen. You're seeing something else than the couch when this is happening. But yeah. And you know what? Thanks for taking the bullet on the topic that nobody wants. It's a thankless job when you've got to carry the whole team. But it's the cross I carry.
But just watch, okay? Just watch Fox and Friends and see if you can identify the speed wobbles. And just know that if somebody has a little bit of a shaky steering wheel, there's another guy watching and kicking the skateboard. Just going, I can't wait.
Just like guys, though. Just like guys. I'm not here to help you. I'm here to watch you fall hard, okay? And then we're going to laugh about it.
You're totally right. You couldn't do this on any other show where you don't have this relationship. If I did that, I like him, I just don't have this relationship with Steve Doocy. Of course, his skateboard would never wobble. But if I don't have that relationship with others, they'd be like, what is he doing right now? Why is he staring at me? All right, story number 4 with Pete Hegseth. All right, man, I'm watching Alexander the Great on Netflix. It's a docudrama series about his conquest throughout Asia, expanding it from a small little empire in Macedonia throughout the entirety of Asia and defeating the Persian Empire. And I got to thinking of it when I was watching this, man. For some reason, it reminded me of Jimmy Johnson, the legendary coach of the Dallas Cowboys. I'm pretty sure it was Johnson that said this. There is no status quo. You're either getting better or you're getting worse. Every day in sports. You're never remaining the same. And it kind of made me think about this when it came to Alexander and empire building, and like you're either growing or you're shrinking. And I wondered if that applied. And then I thought about America, and I thought, well, what about us? I mean, we're not a traditional empire in the historical sense of expanding our territorial boundaries, but we certainly reach out with our tentacles, bases and bombs, and in centuries past, some form of colonialism, more prominent in Europe. My point is, I'm wondering, does that apply in modern day analysis, in history that we're living in? Like, if we're not growing, are we shrinking? Now, you and I are both, and everyone watching knows, I'm pretty much a non-interventionist, not an isolationist, but a non-interventionist filtered through the prism of, serve America first. Our prosperity and our peace come first. But just kind of like in the broad historical context, I started to wonder, every other empire is either growing or declining, one or the other. Are we the exception because we have 2 great oceans on either side of us, and no great rivals to the north or to the south? Can we afford to be, citizen farmers, city states, focus on our own internal prosperity and freedom, or are we missing the broad historical scope of every other empire?
I love this topic. I love the way you're thinking about it. I've thought about it a lot too. We think about the Roman Empire. We think about the phrase I've always used, I wrote about it in my first book, is history is not over. History is not over, which is sort of a pedestrian phrase, but it's playing off of Francis Fukuyama, who wrote the book The End of History, this idea that like democracies were inevitably going to support each other and peace would break out, this perpetual peace. And it hasn't happened, and it's not going to happen, because humanity is not perfectible, and pride and power, and these are all things that infect the human soul, and countries are going to rise and fall. So absolutely everything is moving, and it's not just military power, it's economic power, it's cultural power, it's the international systems, it's how mutually dependent countries are on each other. And I look at the complacency of the American system, which loves to see now our power executed only through bombs and drones and interventions. And I contrast that with, say, what China's trying to do through international bodies, through debt, through economic, through cultural influence, through technology, through intellectual property. Like, they're ascendant in their aspirations, and it feels like we're playing defense in a very static way, trying to. I love that we're trying to make America great again, but we're trying to sort of reverse engineer greatness that we had, as opposed to looking to the future as the frontier of American dominance. And again, I don't mean that geographically or militarily per se, just in our sort of status in the world. That's one of the big flaws of our republic, is that we think 2 to 4 years in advance, because we think in iterations of elections, and we make giant changes in direction. We're going to go from worshiping climate change under Joe Biden to dismissing it completely under Donald Trump and unleashing energy independence. Like, that's not an effective way to steer the leader of the free world. So I think that's the big question we're all asking. Are we at the top? Are we in the decline? And what does that mean? And usually the power dynamics change when a country in decline thinks it's big enough to defeat its next rival, and comes up against something it can't defeat. And then the collapse comes quickly. And that doesn't have to be militarily. It can be culturally, politically, or financially. And the question is not if, it's when that clash comes and what form it takes.
Well, if that's true, and I think it is true, then the American experiment or the American empire, and you could argue that it wasn't supposed to be an empire, it was supposed to be an experiment, is relatively short-lived. If you're you didn't say whether or not we are on the decline, whether we've hit the apex or not, but historically, look, 200-300 years would be a short run for a world power, and I don't know where we are in that. There's a lot of people saying we are a declining empire. Everything that's happening culturally is a symptom of a declining empire, and I think they have a really strong point. But I just try to sometimes. By the way, you're 100% correct about China as well. China thinks way longer time horizons. They think 50 years. They think 100 years. What will this look like? Yeah. And I have given them, I've done monologues here on the Will Cain Show about we should rival China and criticize China, but we should also take lessons from your strategic foe on what they're doing well. And they seem to have a lot of global influence without bases and bombs. So maybe there's something to learn from China. But I try to broaden that scope myself and say, are we truly over the hump? We've already hit the apex and we are on the decline, or does history tell us we've got a longer runway?
Two quick things on that. The average, I remember doing the research on it in my first book. Again, the average lifespan of republics is about 275 years. Historically speaking, there's been some shorter ones, there's been some much longer ones. So we're right in that area where you could conceive of a tipping point. And then I think things just happen a lot faster. I mean, think about the speed of communication, the speed of movement, the speed of change today is a lot different than in Alexander or the Roman time. I mean, it just took that much longer to exert your will or your weaknesses to be exposed or a foe to take advantage of you than it does today. So I think our fall could be faster and even harder than previous. But I don't know that it'll be a military, because of what you described in the oceans in North and South. It'll be influence, culture. I mean, look at the British Empire, look at the French Empire, look at what was and then what wasn't and how quickly it happened. I think that's the kind of influence we think we can exert, which is we fly our drones over your country and bomb you at will with no consequence. May not be the world we live in 50 years, but it could be that China bombs your country at will, with no consequence, and we're at the whim of, those are the ways in which it would change.
Really good stuff with Pete Hegseth. Enjoyed it. Another episode of Will and Pete here. I appreciate it, man. I'll see you again next time.
Thank you, brother. Try the double collar. It's good.
All right.